Good morning, Shavua Tov, Agotavach. Thanks very much for tuning in to Kehillat Shari Torah's daily review of the Sefer HaMitzvot, the Rambam's Minyan HaMitzvahs, counting of the 613 mitzvahs for Sunday, October 31st. We've been talking about various prohibitions. We are into the prohibition part of the thou shalt and thou shalt nots. We're definitely holding in the thou shalt nots. We're about a third of the way, a little bit more than a third of the way through the prohibitions, and we have been speaking over the last couple of weeks about prohibitions to do largely with temple sacrifices, offerings, the life of ritual offerings that was offered daily by Kohanim, also on Shabbat, Yom Tov, holidays, and so on. First in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle in the desert, as we made our way out of Egypt and into the Holy Land, and then eventually, once we built the temple, what took place in the temple there with the order and procedure of sacrifices and offerings. These prohibitions that we are talking about have to do with those offerings, particularly prohibitions against eating them, who is allowed to eat them, what state of being they are in terms of ritual purity, tuma and tahara, ritual purity and impurity. Those are imperfect translations, approximations for the words. And also times for eating them and locations for eating them. So that's what we're talking about. So one could say to a person who claims to be not mitzvah observant or doesn't observe quote-unquote any of the mitzvahs, as I've heard people say, well, tell me, have you ever eaten an unblemished firstling, an unblemished bechor outside of Yerushalayim? Like, what are you talking about? Say, trust me, it's a mitzvah, and I know you haven't done that one, so there's a mitzvah right there that you keep. That's maybe one of the. There are maybe ones that are a little bit less obscure, but nonetheless, we see that by simply not doing committing these proscribed transgressions, we are in fact keeping a good bit of the mitzvahs. So that's good to know and a good thing to calm our minds. And if we know that we're doing them and we can do them with intention, we can not eat an unblemished firstling outside Jerusalem with intention of not doing it. So how much the better. That is our first of several commandments today, several prohibitions that have to do specifically with, I think almost all have to do with location. Certain offerings, certain sacrifices, and so on have to be consumed in a certain locale. For example, eating an unblemished bechor, a firstborn, has to be brought as an offering, as long as it is unblemished, does not have a mum, something that would prohibit it from being offered on the altar in the temple in Jerusalem, and it must be consumed in Jerusalem. So to eat it outside, to eat the meat of that offering outside of Jerusalem constitutes a violation of prohibition number 144. 145 is we're prohibited from eating the sin offering and the guilt offering, a korban chatas and a korban asham, outside of the temple court, outside of the azara of the temple. In other words, it has to be eaten in what the scholars call the sacred precincts, the particularly designated parts of the temple grounds for consuming those. Prohibition number 146 has to do with eating the meat of a korban oila, of a burnt offering, an offering that has to be burnt completely. We're forbidden, of course, from eating any of it. Has to be burnt entirely. So this we'll see in Me'ilah, in Tractate Me'ilah, has a section dealing with improper use of various consecrated foods. Let's see, we'll do one more that has to do not with place but with time. Eating kodshim kalim, eating lesser offerings of lesser degree of holiness. For example, a korban shlamim, a peace offering. That's one that is brought in the course of the temple service, and that's allowed to be consumed anywhere in Yerushalayim by any person for 2 days and a night. Remember, we spoke a few days ago, sometime last week, about if the Kohen who slaughters the sacrifice has improper intention. Words are coming slow today. About how the offering that he's in the middle of slaughtering is to be disposed of. In other words, when it'll be eaten and so on. It invalidates the sacrifice, and if it's left beyond that time frame. So here we're talking about 2 days and the night in between them. So that also invalidates the sacrifice. Okay, so that was what we spoke about before. Now we're talking about consuming those sacrifices, those offerings, before their blood is sprinkled on the altar. There's a Seder Hadvarim, there's an order of things that have to happen. So those free will offerings, as they're sometimes called, have to be first slaughtered, of course, and then the sprinkling of their blood on the altar has to take place, after which they can, in fact, be consumed. Okay, that's a lot for one day. We will leave it there. Please join us again tomorrow. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful week.